Okay, you're listening to WRPI Troy. This is 91.5 FM, the Upstate Underground. We are here today with a very special guest. She is a composer of electronic acoustic and contemporary classical music, and she used to be a professor here at RPI. We're here today with Nina C. Young.
Hello.
Okay, she is here live in studio with us, taking a break from doing some work over at EMPAC. So I want to start off, Nina, you want to tell us a little bit about your event you're putting together?
Yeah, so I'm making a new piece at EMPAC that is called Nothing Is Not Borrowed in Song and Shattered Light. And I'm really excited to be here because this is a project that was about to have a world premiere in March 2020, and then everything changed. So yeah, I was on my way actually taking the Amtrak up to Albany when I got the call that said, nope, RPI is shutting down. So this is not going to happen. So I felt like I was hanging at the edge of a cliff. And so 2 years have come and passed. I did another project with EMPAC using their wave field synthesis array, which I'll talk a little bit about. It's super, super cool. So this last summer in August in New York City at the Domena Center, they partnered with the Time Spans Festival and had 4 composers write new pieces for the array that was brought down to New York. So that was super cool. It was me, Bora Yoon, Mia Masaoka, and Pamela Z. Okay. And I think that concert actually happened here again at RPI in February.
Yeah, I think it was like early March.
March,
I think.
Yeah, that's exactly it. So that was a really cool experience, and I was working with the array in its normal horizontal orientation. And I got a lot of, I guess, extra experience, so I decided to change the project that got postponed in March 2020, readapt it for what I'm doing here. But the cool thing about this is, if for anybody who's listening who's experienced wave field synthesis before, usually you walk into the space and you see the line of little speakers that are making all the spatial audio. But instead in my piece, I have them hidden overhead. So it's in the theater at EMPAC. There are 2 arrays, so you don't see where the sounds are coming from at all. Instead, you have light projections that kind of guide you on this experience.
Okay. So what can visitors expect from the show? Because I remember we were reading the description on EMPAC and we were just like, is this a thing you experience, interact with, or you walk around with it, or? Yeah,
so it's kind of sits somewhere in between an installation and a performance.
Okay.
So you enter the space and you kind of explore it. So you have the entire theater is for yours to explore. The lights are totally out. There are video projections, light projections happening. And you're going to listen to the sounds. You can sit on the stage. You can walk around. You can go and find a seat. You can move around and sort of see what happens. Because the beautiful thing about the wave field synthesis is it's kind of like being in a VR headset, except it's real.
Gotcha.
So you can walk to a virtual sound, except it's in real space. You don't have to be sitting in the sweet spot to hear all the spatial audio working the right way. And that's a pretty special experience. So that's what makes this so unique. So if there was a sound located, let's say a coordinate point 3 and 4, you can be like, oh, that sound's there. Let me go and walk to it. Let me touch it, if you will.
Oh, that's cool. It sounds like synesthesia, kind of.
Yeah. And so I have some lights that are helping guide you towards the sound, so you can kind of walk through them. You can hear them as you move away from them. You hear their reverb work a little more, and you know that they're fading out. But anybody can come and walk to it. You don't have to somebody's blocking my sound. I'm not going to hear it the right way.
That's really cool. So I guess have you done this at other venues, or are you just doing this at EMPAC?
This is a pretty special thing that EMPAC has. The technology is not new. It was theorized in the 70s.
Okay.
But EMPAC has built, at least in North America, the first array that's high resolution enough where the effect actually works.
Oh, wow. That's cool.
Gotcha.
So it's a really special feature of RPI and EMPAC to have this set. There are a couple of other people who have come and worked at EMPAC and who are building sister sets around the country. But those really aren't even online yet. So this is the place where this stuff is happening.
That's really cool. It is interesting. As RPI student, it's a very tech school. We don't hear about all the special features when it comes to all the arts and stuff that. So could you do this at another venue if you could, or?
Yeah. So what happened this summer was they actually took all the equipment and I installed it in another venue.
Oh, wow.
So yes, you can take these speaker arrays and install them, or what RPI did here, it was Todd Voss and Johannes Goebel that kind of are the masterminds behind the project. And they documented everything so that it's open source, you could physically build your own. I'm not quite sure how much that would cost.
Yeah, that's
right.
But I do know that it's not, if you were to, for example, say, I want a really sexy Dolby Atmos surround sound theater, that's going to cost like orders of magnitude more than it would to make this kind of audio setup.
But so, like, given the right resources, anyone can do something with this.
Anybody can construct it. It's not proprietary.
Gotcha.
Okay, yeah, because I know there was a lot of thought and consideration that went into, like, EMPAC as, like, an acoustical space kind of thing, because, like, that was the thing they pushed, I remember, on, like, well, any tour they go through RPI is they talk about all that.
Yeah, and so with this particular piece, I'm doing it in the theater.
Okay.
Partially because the ceilings are really high on stage, so I can hang the array high enough to reach the sound sources that I want. You think about this like idea of cone projections coming out. But what's really cool is the theater, it's very acoustically silent, but it does have its own acoustic principles to it. And I'm allowing these sort of natural sound sources that the speaker arrays are creating to be affected by the room.
Oh, okay, that's cool. So, did you get to, so as I mentioned before, you were a professor at RPI, did you get to utilize EMPAC at all in like any of your classes kind of thing?
It was, I taught music and sound 1 and 2.
Okay.
And I also taught intro to music at Rensselaer, which is one of the Haas freshmen.
Oh yeah, the IHSS. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Courses.
Yeah, I remember those.
Sorry, I don't remember the course numbers anymore now. But having EMPAC was a really fun resource because, we would talk about something and we could go and take visits. And I arrived here just as the wave field array was being finished and tweaked. So I got to experience a lot of demos and become friendly with the idea of what it was doing. Because it is such a unique thing. And then EMPAC used to run, didn't happen now because of the pandemic, these international spatial audio workshops in the summer months. So I would attend those as well, and that was really interesting. And then when I left RPI, the curators at EMPAC invited me to come and start to build some projects there with the wave field.
That's really cool.
So how long were you actually working here?
I started in fall 2016 and I left at the end of the spring semester 2018.
Okay.
Okay, so 2 years.
Nice.
Okay. Where'd you move on to after that?
Right now I'm a professor at the University of Southern California, Thornton School of Music, so
That's really
other
cool.
side of the country. And there, it's different than here. Like I really enjoyed being in an interdisciplinary arts program here that was very tech heavy, whereas now I'm in a conservatory and a university.
Oh, okay.
So it's a musical school and a university, but it's very exciting because I'm building a spatial audio lab there.
Oh, wow.
Oh, nice.
Doing a different kind of algorithmic tech called ambisonics.
Oh, wow. How would you define ambisonics?
So instead of the wave field, which is creating, it basically creates a wave front that simulates the idea of acoustic sound in a space emulating omnidirectionally the wave fronts that it would do. What ambisonics will do, or most other surround sound spatial audio arrays, is they'll create the imaging as though you in the perfect sweet spot are hearing the sounds distributed in a particular way. But the wave fields that are created are not real. So if you move out of, you can think about, once again, being in a VR environment, 360 degrees, but if you walked 45 degrees and like 2 meters to the left, the whole imaging would be wrong. Like everything would be morphed.
Okay.
So like the images and the sounds really close to you would be too close, the other ones would be too far away, and you lose all the fidelity.
I'm having such a hard time picturing that. Well, you're definitely convincing me to go to your event because I'm curious to check it out.
Yeah, you can think about like stereo speakers, for example.
Yeah.
So you have the stereo imaging, and then if somebody was to put like a mattress in front of the stereo, or if the stereo pair, if you were to like walk too much to the left,
got it. Or you mess
you
with
don't
the balance.
you won't see the center image anymore. So it's that, but with many more channels.
That's the thing, is like so much of this is like is like you can describe what's happening,
Yeah.
but there's like such a disconnect where it's like I definitely feel compelled to just like
You gotta just go experience it.
I just gotta walk in and just see what's actually happening here.
Another really cool thing about the piece, so in the original version, there's a group in New York called the American Brass Quintet.
Okay.
So it's 5 guys who plays brass instruments.
Mm-hmm.
I wrote a piece for them called "The Glow That Illuminates, the Glare That Obscures."
Oh, he loves that song.
That was my favorite of what I listened to before this.
So I'm a violinist, but I love brass instruments, and I fell in love with them through this group.
Okay.
They played another piece of mine about, oh God, now 8 or 9 years ago, and really opened me up into the beauty of instruments that I thought were just supposed to be loud and for the military, not realizing that they were
That's fair.
sensitive voices. And so I wrote them this really large piece that looks at 2 Renaissance motets.
Yeah.
So these are
I just queued it now. There we go.
Okay. Yeah, vocal writings from the 14th century, 15th century. And so I'm fragmenting them, and there's a whole tradition where brass players play motets and madrigals too, so it was kind of interesting. So originally in the March 2020 version of the EMPAC project, the quintet was going to come up and they were going to play parts of this piece and then improv.
Oh, that would have been awesome.
That would have been awesome.
Right.
COVID.
And it took us years to find a place and a time where EMPAC had room. They could have room in their schedules. Like, the whole thing was a disaster and a meltdown when it didn't happen. So it was like, okay, how are we possibly going to find a time where we can all be in the same place again? Like, this is not going to happen. So instead, in September, October, I went and I had a recording session with them, and I recorded them individually doing improv prompts, just like they would do in this piece.
Oh, I see.
And so now in the installation version, when you walk into the space, you're also going to see these 5 brass instruments hung and illuminated, and the sounds from these players are going to come out of those instruments at times.
That's really cool.
That's really cool.
Yeah, it's going to be cool.
So that's part of the installation next week.
That's part of this thing next week, yeah.
So they're...
for the listeners, that's talking about next Thursday, the 21st at 7 p.m., and you can register online for that. If people are as intrigued by this as we are.
I think correct me if I'm wrong, it's limited still to RPI students and faculty.
Yeah, if you are somebody I know listening, message me, maybe we can work something out.
But yeah, if you're an RPI student, staff, or faculty, you can go to the EMPAC's website and register with your rent and all that jazz.
And so the 5 instruments you mentioned will just be some of the things that are hung. So there's like a wide variety of things that are hung.
No, so these are the only physical things in the space.
Okay.
So everything else is projection.
Gotcha.
And sounds that are sort of taking the space of what we would think are objects.
Okay.
And then there are these 5 brass instruments that are they should look like they're suspended in the heavens in some way.
That's awesome.
And I was just working with the lighting team. They came up with this like beautiful way to light them.
Oh, yeah.
And I told them, I was like, this is what my imagination was dreaming up, except you actually made it. So the team there is incredible. And it's going to be very magical. So sometimes you'll see these instruments that are where these humans should be. But it's very ghostly.
It's like kind of empty, but purposefully.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I was listening to some more of your work and the vibe I got. So this I just found very hauntingly beautiful, and then there's other stuff that's a little more kind of spooky, kind of creepy. So where does your inspiration come from that, and what do you think drives the type of music you create? At what point do you figure out oh, it's gonna sound like this is gonna sound like that?
Every project I think is a little different, so it depends on the musicians I'm working with. Is there a tech element or not? Maybe some of my projects have that, some of my projects don't. What is the space? Who is it for? And then of course there's always kind of poetic, inspirational ideas behind this, or an affect, an emotion, a feeling I want to create in a particular piece. So all of these things tie together, both in the beginning of the piece, and then as you're making the work, it kind of informs itself where it should go next.
Yeah, greater than the sum of its parts kind of thing. Yeah.
I did want to ask, tying into that, because I noticed going through your SoundCloud that you had 2 different songs that were made for short films or videos. Those being Always and Forever, as well as I believe it's pronounced Noman.
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask, sort of, you being someone that makes music, is the process for that sort of you are given these videos and then you're sort of interpreting from there, or are you working with the creator to like kind of create both at the same time?
This depends on the project. Like traditionally, in a very typical film music scenario, you would get the film with time code, and then you have some instructions on things to do.
Like if you're like making a score for it or something.
Yeah, if you're making a score, or you're writing notation to be recorded, or just doing electronic sounds. And then if you're working with other kinds of artists, filmmakers as well, some of them actually work in reverse, where you make the sounds first and then do the then they edit to the music and create some film out of it. And these projects, so the first one, the Always and Forever project, I'm working with an artist named Yulia Lenina, and she was making animations. We were supposed to, this is another like pandemic thing that happened. We were supposed to make an installation project in Austin, Texas. Lockdown, couldn't do it anymore in person. So we decided to just make something small together, but something for the screen, something for the way that people were digesting media at the time.
Okay.
So she created animations. I started improvising with synthesizers to these animations. I found particular cues that I liked, and then I asked her to extend, contract different parts of it to make the tempos and just the whole thing work better. So she definitely drove the project first with the visual aspect, but then we collaborated in adjustments back and forth. And the Noman project is a dance project with a choreographer that I work with, who often will choreograph to my music.
Oh.
But in this case, he had made this video during the pandemic of his dancers in these 4 different locations in New York, and it has to do with sundials and timekeeping. And so it's all about the shadow of the dancers and what it's doing with the ground and the light. And so he made this video, and there was no sound to it at all. And then he's like, do you want to make something out of it? And I was like, that sounds great. So what I did is I actually took a recording of another piece of mine called this is Ainsi Soit-il for solo cello. And I passed it through this kind of granular synthesis engine that I created. So I'm taking fragments of the recording and looping it and making all these particles, and that's what I made, and I kind of scored that to the video that he had created.
That sounds really neat.
So you can find those on YouTube if you're
I know. We
interested.
We looked at a few of them before the interview. I want to upload this to YouTube, and I'll put the links in the show notes in the description as well.
Then there's like another. I think you started actually our session with Drink Rain.
Yes.
Which is an electronic track. And I have a collaborator named Luc Dubois, who then made a video that goes with that as well, that I think you can find on YouTube. And that's really cool because he made a video. He passed all the stems that I created through oscilloscopes.
Oh.
And so he kind of like visualized the sounds with oscilloscopes, and then created a montage with the videos. It's very beautiful.
That sounds really neat.
Yeah.
That sounds very neat. So, I'm gonna steal your question. So, like, how do you name your songs when you come up? Do you think of the name first and then, or is it somewhere in the middle?
I would say the names usually. Sometimes I have names first, but that's pretty rare.
Yeah.
The glow that illuminates, the glare that obscures. That name came before I started actually writing notes down on a page.
Oh, okay.
But maybe a year or two into thinking of the project. But most other pieces, the name comes at the end or 3/4 of the way through. Yeah, I have some ideas, but then
Yeah. The glow that illuminates, the glare that obscures is a lovely title for this.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, did you, so you said you were a violinist, so when did you start playing the violin, and did that, like, inform you wanting to become a composer, or did the violinist part come later?
So I started playing violin when I was a kid. They, in New York State, they assign you an instrument, so I got that, I think, in 4th grade.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you were trombone, right?
Yep.
Yeah, so everybody, you get your instruments.
Yep.
I got the violin. It really stuck.
That's awesome.
It felt like a good relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was pretty serious, but not too serious, probably until I got to high school, and then I was like, okay, I want to be really serious about this.
Mm-hmm.
But I always had this, I was like, oh, I really enjoy playing in orchestra. I enjoy classical music, Baroque music,
Mm-hmm.
romantic music. I wasn't aware at all, basically, of 20th or 21st century music, because my teacher was pretty conservative.
Okay.
In terms of like concert music or like the classical tradition.
Oh, so you didn't do the thing I know they do in some like high school bands. They'll do like a cover of like Uptown Funk, but like the orchestral version or something.
Well, we would do like pop and jazz adjacent stuff, but I'm talking about like
Modern classical.
modern classical
okay.
stuff, like Ligeti and Messiaen and people like that. I didn't know who those people were, and they're kind of like the bread and butter, I think, of the basic education of what people like me do.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I was listening to lots of electronic music, electronica, rock, pop, and the stuff that sits more on the fringes of these areas. And so I was caught between like a sound world that was that, and then a sounds world that was this concert stuff, and I didn't realize that I could find a connection that worked between really till at the end of high school, when I started meeting more performers who were in university. I went to a summer festival that had a contemporary music program in it, and then I was my mind was blown, and I was like, oh, that's what I want to do, because it connects these two worlds in different places. But like where I fell in love with sound, it happened with bells.
Really?
When I was a little kid, I lived in Nyack, New York, down the street from a Russian Orthodox church.
Okay.
Oh.
And they have a really big bell ringing tradition. So especially in high holidays.
Was it like a bell choir?
It's a little different than like a Western bell choir or carillon, and it's more. I think it's more similar to like a Balinese gamelan and the rhythmic textures it creates. But yeah, there are different. There are low bells and high bells. They're not really tuned to the same kind of scalar structure that you would see in like Westminster chimes kind of thing. But it's close. And I loved this. I could hear it all the time. It was this amazing thing. And so this is like a sound that stayed with me for my whole life. And actually in 2011, I wrote a piece called Kolokol, which means bell. And it's about this kind of these bells and this bell ringing tradition. And at Harvard's Lowell House, they have a set of these kinds of bells that are called the Danilov bells. So I went there to record them. It's on the Spotify.
It's on the Spotify?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll have to fade it.
That's okay.
This one, okay.
And so for me, the idea of a bell being this magical sound, that there's like a whole universe contained in one object. You ring a bell and it has a really loud attack in the beginning, and that attack, if you start to unpack it, or you can do like a spectrum analysis where you can see all the frequencies in there, it has a lot of frequencies. But as time goes on, you start to hear the most important ones, and it's kind of like, okay, so you have this big crash, and then like, what's the world that lives inside of that? And I think for me, that's kind of a poignant metaphor for all of the music I make.
Oh, that is beautiful. I love that. Okay.
Actually, so speaking, sort of tying into your background, what were you listening to more specifically that sort of influenced, not necessarily what you make, but just in addition to you making music in the first place?
Yeah, me making music in the first place. I mean, I think when I was a teenager, I'm sure this is not true, but I felt like I was the person who listened to more Radiohead than absolutely anyone
I think all three of us have felt that at a point individually.
Yeah, I think a lot of people have. But for me, that really sat as this middle ground between experimentalism, the structures of rock that I really like, and something about the narrative structure and the more complex song forms that to me were familiar with the kind of, I guess the structure that I was used to in classical music, and especially the stuff that was a little bit more experimental. And like, so for me, that was such a beautiful spot. I have a more recent, as in 10 years ago, love that's a little bit similar is like Punch Brothers. It's an indie bluegrass band, but like alternative bluegrass. And they have some electronic elements. Chris Steele is the mandolin player. He is the leader of the pack. Yes, they happen to do Radiohead covers sometimes too. And it's also, it's a really creative world where so much attention to detail is spent on the timbre or the kind of sounds that are created. And I think for me that was like the thing with Radiohead. It was like every sound is considered and beautiful and interesting, and every layer has its own life.
Yeah, that's one thing that I really liked about like Radiohead's music as well, is like the intentionality of it, of just how experimental it was. What's your favorite Radiohead record? I have to ask.
It changes, and I mean, the answer I will always give is Kid A.
Okay.
I'm a Kid A.
Yeah.
I'm a Kid A.
I could have guessed that
a
one.
Kid A over OK Computer kind of gal, but but I love them all, and I kind of hated it when it came out, but I have grown to absolutely adore In Rainbows so much.
In Rainbows tends to be the fan favorite around here.
Is that still your like? Wait, no, that's like. Is that still like top 5 for you, right?
And Rainbows might be my favorite record.
Oh yeah.
It might be. Yeah. It's a different like kind of thing, because like they have favorite records that's like I appreciate this for the music of this, and then I don't know if you know the Beths at all. They're like a New Zealand band, like Future Me Hates Me, and like I just feel this a lot kind of favorite record.
Yeah, there are different records, the feeling ones, but there's something really special about In Rainbows.
For sure. I think even Hank, another one of our DJs, has said like this is just a perfect record. It's just they do the album thing really well.
I always flop back and forth between In Rainbows and A Moon-Shaped Pool, just because of how gorgeous that album is.
That is
gorgeous.
Such a gorgeous album too. I took a break from listening to it when that came out. I think that was nonstop a little bit. That was summer 2016. I think.
That's fair.
It's always so interesting for me to like see, because like you can read about, because like you mentioned sort of like the like how like for In Rainbows when that came out for you, of just like you weren't crazy about it. It's just like, that's an interesting one for me. It's because like, wow, I was 5 when that happened, so it's like I didn't like it's like, because like you can read about like if you're like looking back into music of just like it's like, oh, this was not critically acclaimed at the time, or this was a controversial album, but it's like now it's loved. It's interesting to me to like.
So you were aware of it now that it's been loved.
Yeah, but it's just like to have that context of like being excited for something to come out and then being like, what is this? But then like a decade later or whatever, the reappraisal is just like, no, this was like ahead of its time or something like that.
Yeah.
I think it's also tough with a band that you love so much. And this happens all the time. It's like the fans of a band hardly ever allow the band to change.
Oh, yeah.
Which is exactly the opposite of like what a good musician should do. A good musician should consistently evolve.
Yeah.
Right.
And so I think that was for me one of the things where I was like, I was just being a fangirl. And I was like, no, I just want one of the other ones. And instead, like it took me a little bit of time to be like, no, like this is beautiful what they're doing and the direction they're going.
If you listen to Arctic Monkeys, I felt exactly the same way about Tranquility Base Hotel and Casino, because I was like, I want like my indie rock, and then they gave me like a jazz lounge album on the moon, and now I'm like, what? now I think it's awesome.
Yeah, it just takes some time.
Yeah. Speaking of time, it's time for a PSA, so we're going to take a very quick, probably 30-second break, and we're going to listen to a PSA, and we'll be back very shortly. This is WRPI Troy. I'm Vicky.
I'm Josh.
And
Nina.
Hell yeah, we'll be back. I forgot to turn off the automation at the beginning, it's fine. Okay, and we are back. And
It's good that you played that recording of me playing the violin in the background. That's a joke.
If you like that, come by next week.
Yeah, Thursday's gonna be a real hit, guys.
You have a projection of a banana.
There's this, I usually play this for my students when we're talking about early 20th century music, and the move to this thing called 12-tone, where it was the emancipation of the hierarchy of the scale structure, and so every one of the white and black keys on the piano should be equal. And so you could only like repeat one once they've all been used. But there's this funny, you can Google this, if you do like 12-tone masters advertisement, and it reminds me very much of that PSA we just listened to.
That's funny. So, do you get to perform the violin much nowadays, or are you mostly just sticking to the composition?
I mostly stick to composition. Sometimes I have a couple of pieces of my own that I play, because I don't know, I know what I want in my music, but it takes a lot of practice to keep it up, and I don't really have the time or feel like I have the confidence to play other people's music up to the standards that they want it.
So you mostly playing your own?
Yeah, so it's playing my own. I do a lot of electronic improv with the computer and some other found objects and instruments like that. But I use it more now as a creative tool when I'm making. I don't like to compose if I don't have my fiddle somewhere nearby.
Okay.
So as a way to touch, because when you're composing, a lot of it, especially if you're writing something on paper for acoustic musicians to play, a lot of it, you're just sitting in your room by yourself, scribbling weird things on a page. It's very strange, and it's really detached from what music is, which is like humans making sound in a space. When you're working with electronic music, it's different because you can create things
and play around with it as you're going.
Yeah, but I like to be able to have the tactile experience of making sound. So I have my violin, I have a viola, I have a cello, I have a whole bunch of percussion instruments, and mallets, and the piano, and then I have microphones. I'm a terrible singer, but I sing all the time when I'm composing. Yeah.
So what's it like when what's it like when you have a piece composed and you hear it for the first time? If you have a big arrangement kind of thing, what's that like?
I just had a premiere on Tuesday at the Morgan Library in New York. A new piece for Hub New Music, it's for flute, clarinet, violin, and cello.
Okay.
And then electronics, which are mostly vocal samples of a poet named Rosie Stockton.
Okay.
So I'm looking at Rosie's poetry from a book called Permanent Volta, and fragmenting that. So that was crazy because I went to the New York premiere, but that was the third time the group had performed the piece. I had finished writing it in March, and I showed up 2 hours before the concert, heard a little dress rehearsal sound check, and then heard the piece. Usually you get to go to rehearsals, but with the pandemic it's been weird. And so, as you do it more, you get used to it. Yeah. But I haven't done that now in a couple of years. And so I felt a little bit, I was like, oh, I'm so nervous. But they played it really well, so it was fun.
That's an I guess as a composer, when you're composing for multiple instruments, it's an extremely collaborative effort. I think it's really interesting, and especially because I don't know how much you even interface or interact with the people, the musicians who play the instruments. It's really fascinating.
Yeah, I have a piece called Heartthrob. How should we find this on Spotify? If you type in the name Mike Compitello, Compitello.
M-I-C.
Oh, no, Michael. Okay, rather, type in unsnared drum.
Unsnared drum.
Snare.
Okay.
Yeah, there's that album.
Oh, Heartthrob. Oh,
Heartthrob.
Okay.
So this was a very, very collaborative project. So Mike Compitello is a fantastic percussionist. He's based out of Phoenix right now. He's a professor at ASU. And this was a few years ago, he just approached some of his favorite composers, let's say, who are his friends, and we're like, I want you guys to write me a solo percussion piece. And I don't know what everybody else said, but I was like, oh, Mike, for you, of course. Like, I can't wait, solo percussion. I'm going to have a vibraphone, all these metal things. And he's like, no, just snare drum. And I was like, Mike, you gotta be kidding me. Like, that's a real tough order. And I was like, how about snare drum and electronics? And he's like, no, the speakers, the equipment, everything. I want to be able to just travel with just snare drum. And I thought, oh gosh, okay. So
there, I'll see what
yeah, you can open it up. And for those of you who are listening, it's worth trying to find a very beautiful music video that we made.
Oh, okay.
If you get piqued, I mean, I would feel bad ever recommending anybody listen to a solo snare drum album. I mean, it sounds like death.
We've recommended way more like obscure, ridiculous things to each other around here. Trust me.
This is one of the most beautifully recorded albums, I think, on planet Earth.
Okay.
So 4 pieces, mine and 3 others.
Mm-hmm.
All 3 pieces are very, very different looks on what you can do with this instrument that once again has a very like militaristic history. It's supposed to be loud, it's supposed to punctuate, you're supposed to play paradiddles, that's about it. And instead these 4 pieces create this life and this world inside this instrument. We went to a studio called Octaven Audio in Yonkers, New York. The engineer is Ryan Straber. I helped produce the album. We had 13 mics on the snare drum at particular times. We have the mixes that we made. Each piece is mixed completely differently. It's magical. So in this particular piece that I wrote for Mike, he said no electronics, whatever. So I was like, okay. Mike travels around a lot. He stays in a lot of our apartments. So he went around on a mission to sort of warm us up to the idea. So one day he came back to my apartment, there's a snare drum in there. So like play me on it and a bunch of mallets. I'm a musician, like I can't resist. So, at first I look at the thing with a side eye, I'm like, I don't know about you, but then you start touching it a little bit, start playing it. My neighbors eventually want to kill me because I'm like,
I could totally picture this in like an artsy short film. This is great.
Like it was hilarious. And so over the course of 6 months, I had this love affair with this instrument. And then I had these transducers.
Okay.
For those of you who don't know what a transducer is, it's the same thing that happens in a microphone or a speaker. You can think about your speaker cone that wobbles back and forth. Or, if you drive up to somebody who has a really souped up Honda Civic and the entire road is vibrating.
Yeah, that.
Yeah. Okay. So that thing. So what happens is to capture emanate sound, we need to know what the sound, the vibrations that are happening. So a transducer acts like a speaker, except you can touch it to things. So you can put it on your forehead, you can put it on the table, you can put it on the wall, and then it's going to transmit from your audio device, and it's going to create a speaker out of that.
Oh,
these things are super cool.
Oh, I've seen those things in like Instagram ads. Yeah, I've totally seen those.
Yeah,
in
they're super cool. It's kind of like, if also, I don't know if you've seen like the bone conduction headphones for runners that you don't have to put them in your ears and they kind of just vibrate your skull.
I've seen those in like movies that are set in like 2050.
Yeah. So those things actually exist,
cool.
And that's also a transducer, just using your skull as the membrane. So I decided, I was like, what would happen if I stuck one of these on the bottom of the snare drum?
Okay.
Thus making like a speaker out of the snare drum. And I did, and I started playing stuff through it, and I was like, this is really cool. And so I called up Mike, and I was like, you won't need speakers. The snare drums, it's all going to be the snare drum, Mike. Don't worry about it.
Everything's the snare drum.
So basically, I create a feedback system. So I have another little diaphragm called a contact mic on the side of the snare drum, this transducer on the bottom, a tiny little audio interface, and I create a feedback loop. And so the drum listens to what the drummer is doing, but it also goes through a computer code that has algorithms, and then the drum decides to emanate sounds. And then when Mike is playing, he dampens the sounds back and forth. So it's this conversation between drum and performer that's super dynamic and interesting. And like the recording, I think the recording is really lovely, but in the video you can really see how the whole system is working, and it's pretty magical.
That sounds like a really interesting performance as well, honestly.
Yeah, and it's so fun to watch live.
That's really cool. So does is he just like what other instruments are on this record then?
So this record is just snare drum.
It's just the whole thing snare
the
drum.
whole snare, yeah. Everybody, this record is just super duper, just snare drum. Listen, I've given it to a lot of friends to listen to, and they're like, "Oh, actually, it's really good." Oh, I wouldn't have thought so.
You'd be surprised, especially because you're really into like ambient music, which I tend to call like the lowest common denominator of what music is. Because it kind of is, because you can't really describe it to people. You're just like, it makes this sound and it's really good.
Well, I remember you told me that once, and I was like, well, there's the name for my ambient playlist. It's just like the lowest common denominator. And I was just like, yeah, no, so listening to like a lot of this stuff was really cool, because it's just like, because that's the thing is, and you play around a lot with like song lengths, of just like, you have like these really cool, just to make sure I don't butcher it, like the glow that illuminates, the glare that obscures, of just like, that's almost 20 minutes of just like this like gorgeous arrangement. And then you have just some like 2 to 3 minute, like they're short. I did want to ask like sort of what changes for you when you're like making these different, like going between like making like these really large arrangements that are like 15 to 20 minutes versus just a 2 to 3 minute song.
Well, sometimes when you have negotiated or dreamed up a project with some musicians and there are some funders and all this kind of stuff, sometimes the length is dictated to you that way.
Okay.
And sometimes it's an interest and energy of like, what do I want to say? I think like it's really hard to say everything you want to say in a little space. And it's also really hard to say everything you want to say and keep interest in a really like large, long-term, long-scale form.
Right.
So like in between is usually the easiest spot. So it's fun to challenge oneself in either direction. Like we talked about Always and Forever, the animation with Yulia Lenina. That thing is 3.5 minutes. It's packed with different sounds. It's packed, like there's so much stuff in there, and I don't even know if it. I'm not sure I like it by itself with just the sound. It's grown on me over time, but I think like with the visual, the visual imagery is so luscious and chaotic that kind of makes sense.
The sound is what drew me towards it, honestly, is because I remember I was listening to your the SoundCloud, and I was like, this is really cool, and I was like, what is the visual to this? And I was like, oh, this combined is like insane.
Crazy. Yeah, that's like total hallucinogenic stuff going on over there.
I was watching it like next to my boyfriend, and he was like, can you watch that over there?
Like it's funny, some people are very disturbed by it, and other people aren't disturbed at all. Like, I remember, I mean, I've known Julia for a long time, and so I know her style, but I have some friends who are like, are you okay after you make that? And I'm like, oh, it's
okay? Oh, gosh. I think we can talk about this on air, but I visited the Museum of Sex in New York a few weeks ago, and they had this one exhibit where it was like a carnival theme, and they had like a little like showing room. It was just like a 5-minute like short film, and it was very, I feel like calling it was partially erotic, but it was mostly just disturbing. It was like without being too graphic on air, because you know it's 5 o'clock on a Thursday, but it was like folding in of like people, and at one point there was like the climax of the film and everything, and some people walked out that like completely in horror, and some people walked out there like, yeah, that was fine. I walked out of it being like, okay, that was cool, but some people walked there like completely shook, and like it is really interesting how different people can like interpret that kind of I don't even know what way you would call it, just like eccentric visuals.
Yeah, I think it depends. I think what you've had access to,
what you've been exposed to,
and
what you seek out.
and like what your limits. I mean, like when we talk about sexuality, it's all about respecting limits and boundaries. But these can stretch and pull and change over time. And so I think also like when I think about challenging sound or like music, so there's music that we can be like, oh, that's universally pretty, or like oh, it's nice, it's easy, it's simple. But there's also beauty in like the grotesque and the challenging. It's
Yeah.
a different kind of beauty, and I think you have to have a lot more exposure to it to start to unpack the beauty that like sits between the edges.
Yeah, there definitely is stuff in that vein, and we've talked about this with like different genres, whether it is like some things from like ambient to punk that like, okay, this is not a beginner X genre record kind of thing. You kind of have to like ease your way into certain things, and not necessarily like to like it or tolerate it, or just like appreciate it, right?
There's an artist named
notice it.
Pharmakon. I don't know if you guys have ever listened.
Is it F?
Pharmakon.
Is that F or PH?
PHARMAKON.
Okay.
This is, I mean, yeah, this is, I think this goes to the extreme.
I'm curious.
It's, yeah.
Oh.
Bestial Burden. Like, I mean, they're all absolutely
Do you know?
gorgeous.
Do you know if the lyrics are? Is there vocals? If it's clean, I can play it.
I think it's clean. Basically it's just screaming.
Oh.
You won't be able to hear a lot of text.
Okay, we're in an audio format. We can check this out if it is done.
Which one is this?
Vacuum.
This is Vacuum.
Oh yeah, this is the intro track.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
My guess is this for a minute 30 seconds.
Oh.
It'll build. It'll build, and then it kind of goes into the next one. But this is like, I think if listeners are interested in like an experiment of can you find the absolute sensuous beauty?
This is really interesting. Is the whole project just her vocals?
It's her on stage vocals and some analog tech and sometimes meat and it's yeah. I would suggest just like reading about this work.
Well,
it's really cool.
That'll go in the queue for sure. I'll just play in the background a little more. You have some definitely very eclectic music taste. I'll give you that, which is definitely a compliment from around here because we get people listen to a lot of wild stuff. There's always more. When you think you've heard everything, honestly, there's always more.
There's always more. Yeah.
This reminds me of and I feel bad trying to pull it up as a recommendation because it's in my like lowest ratings of I didn't like it. But it's like I don't know if you're familiar with I believe her name is Lyra Promik.
No.
But she does somewhat similar to this album Fountain, where the entire thing is just her manipulating her vocals.
Oh.
It's a lot more like ambient, like new age kind of, but the whole thing is just built off of her vocals and her editing it, of just like using it to simulate these different sounds. And it was an interesting thing because I listened to it with a friend and I had no idea until she told me that it was just her vocals, because I thought it was
really?
I really thought it was just more like traditionally recorded, and I was so impressed by like her being able to like simulate that and like make it like completely unbeknownst to me. So yeah, no, that's really interesting with Bestial Burden.
Yeah, I mean, all of these albums, that Pharmakon makes, I think, are fantastic. And it was, Friends in Montreal in 2014 or 15 that turned me onto this. I didn't know about it at all. So Friends are useful for music recommendations.
Yeah,
absolutely.
But I think like what you were saying about like, one sound, like you couldn't identify at first that the voice was responsible for all this. This is the beauty and the power of the fact that we can manipulate sound with live processing, be it analog or digital or retroactively in the computer. Like you can theoretically synthesize by adding or synthesize by subtracting any sound from any sound.
That's interesting. Have you found any like limits to that? Did you ever wish?
No, that's like what I teach. I teach that there are no limits.
That's cool. So, like, what are the names of your courses? You teach like composition.
So I teach right now I'm focusing on creating a curriculum to teach a 2-semester sequence in digital media, which is focused on computer music. So
Okay.
looking at different ways of using creative coding
Oh,
as
okay.
a musical and artistic tool.
Mhm.
And these are, it's primarily for people who are already specialists at acoustic music.
So is this like for graduate students?
So for
Okay.
graduate students or undergrad students as well, but the idea that all these musical parameters that we have, that we call like pitches and dynamics and scales, there are the scientific equivalents to these, and that if we go and we have higher resolution in that realm, it allows us to do so much more, and so that this becomes a very, very powerful creative and orchestral tool. Like it's just this entire package of orchestration ideas that are infinite to you, and that you have the power to synthesize anything that you want.
Mhm.
So we got about 10 minutes left, so I wanted to ask, so what can we expect next from Nina Young, I guess? Do you have any, you trying to score a movie or something, or what do you have coming up next?
If you asked me this question a year ago, or 5 years ago, I would have told you, no, I don't really want to score music for movies. And then after being like, in my apartment by myself for a year, all I wanted to do was score music for movies. Suddenly that seemed, so I would love to put that out there into the ether. But the next big thing I have coming up is I'm writing a violin concerto for a dear friend of mine named Jennifer Coe.
Okay.
She's a violin soloist, so this is a project that is going to be premiered with the Philadelphia Orchestra in November of this coming year, and then again with the Los Angeles Chamber Orchestra in the spring. So I'm super excited about that.
Okay.
That's the next biggest thing on the horizon.
Cool. So, well, do you have any more questions before we start? Because at the end I was going to talk about the EMPAC events and all that, wrap up with that.
Let me make sure I'm not missing anything. I definitely asked the big ones. Let me see.
Thanks for having me on here. It's nice to chat with you all.
Yeah, I'm super glad to have you. I'm glad we got some cool recommendations out of this too. I was not expecting that.
This is fun.
No, it's honestly just refreshing to be able to have these outside interviews again, because it's been
so long.
At this point, it's been over 2 years.
Well, yeah, and avid listeners will know that Nina's the first non-RPI student we've had in the studio in 2 years.
Yeah. So honestly, it's just refreshing to be able to have not just this outside voice, but someone who is really knowledgeable in this specific musical realm, because it's honestly really interesting getting this exposure to this kind of music, because obviously just being at the radio station, you get a lot of perspectives from a listener angle, but it's so interesting having someone who's super knowledgeable about what actually goes into what you're listening to, and can sort of discuss the tech angle, you talked about, of just or even when talking about working on the snare piece of how do you physically make that happen, that I think is really cool to hear a perspective on.
That's cool.
Yeah, so we have a few musician friends who I know do this. So when you listen to a piece you've heard for the first time, do you have it in your head? It's oh, they use this, and this sound's coming from this kind of thing?
Yeah, well, one of the things, I think it's really awesome to study production, or to listen to what producers are doing in any specific decade, especially what's happening right now, because I think that I can listen to that and I can sort of unpack some of the tools or ideas that they're using, and even if I don't sound like the top 40 that's coming out right now, that stuff really does influence some of the ideas that I'm doing. So I love when I'm driving to put on Z100 or whatever top 40 station, and I like to listen to all the songs and decipher the different layers and be oh, okay, they're doubling the voice there, they're doing this here, oh, there's a new synth sample that everybody seems to be using, or this is how they're treating the bass.
Yeah, that's cool.
So I think as a creator of music, you can listen for pleasure, you can listen for intellect, and you can listen for technique.
I like that perspective. That's cool.
And you can go back and forth between the two. I think it's a danger if you only do one.
Oh yeah, that also reminded me. This was this was January 2020. We had some Danish composers in here, and this was the instrument they had in studio. That they had these big like tubes.
Oh, that's cool.
Around, and it sounded really neat. I forget where it got the recommendation from. Honestly, that they came into the studio, but that was the last time we had this kind of experimental to be brought about it in here. So I'm glad we got some more of it in here today.
Cool.
Do we want to reiterate the EMPAC?
Yeah. So thank you for everyone who tuned in today. So we'll start wrapping up soon, but you can go check out. Are you going to be like physically at the event as well?
Yeah, I'm going to be there, and I'd be happy to chat with anybody who has questions after.
So Nina will be at EMPAC next Thursday, April 21st at 7 p.m. for Nothing Is Borrowed and Song and Shattered Light. It sounds like a really fun and interesting experience in a way that I can't describe, but it sounds like you have to experience, so I recommend people do if they can. This is limited to students, faculty, and staff of RPI. You can register on EMPAC's website with your RIN and all that jazz. But
I would also give a warning just because EMPAC still has the rescheduled event up, and if you go to that one, it doesn't actually let you register just because it's the older one. But it's like the same image.
That's funny. I'll have to tell them about that.
But the right one is up on their website still. It's the one. There will be a big red button at the bottom that
that says register.
Yeah, and this I guess we listened to a lot of different music of mine today. This is the more spatial, quiet, prettier type.
Yeah.
It should be a spiritual experience.
Okay. Yeah, less screaming.
If you're hoping for Pharmacon, it's not the show to go to.
That's the cart. That's the computer. I was gonna say anything. I'll put the glow back on to take us out a little bit. A nice quiet exit. But thanks for coming and talking with us today. I had a great time. I'm really happy we can do interviews
this
again.
Was fun.
Yeah.
Shout out to Vic and Ian at EMPAC for helping us put this together. They are very lovely people. And we will be having another interview with another artist who has residency at EMPAC, Bailey Chesnia, and she has some, also I'll say like out there work from what I've seen of her. So stay tuned for that. That's going to be in 3 weeks. That's May 5th, and hopefully we can do more of these in the future with EMPAC's artists. Nina, thank you very much for being a guinea pig for this and being the first one.
Hey, it worked out. I'm still alive.
Okay, Nina, do you want to give us a WRPI Troy for the sign-off?
Yes. What am I supposed to do?
Just say, you can just say, we can make a spit out of it. You can just say, I'm Nina Young or whatever, and just say, you're listening to WRPI Troy, something like that.
Hi, I'm Nina Young, and you're listening to WRPI Troy.
There we go.
Yay.
There we go. Little claps. Okay, keep it locked, and I think our next live programming will be tomorrow, or later tonight with Black Lodge Radio Hour with Jarrett. We talk about some more movies, more people talking about cool things. Keep listening to WRPI Troy, and thank you everybody who's here today. Yay.